Stray first caught my attention back when it was announced in 2020. It started out with the announcement trailer. At first, I didn't know exactly what I was watching. Yes, I could see the cat, but I could also see the robots, and I could see the dilapidated city. But at the end of the trailer, when it shows the cat climbing up and mews at the camera, I got super excited. It's a cat-based game that doesn't feature a cat that has been anthropomorphized, or at least not to a degree where it's no longer a cat, like with, say, Bubsy, or that terrible mobile game, Life of Black Tiger. So, of course, I waited with bated breath for this game to come out. Who doesn't want to play as a cat? I'm actually sure there's plenty of people who don't. But for me, this was a must. I mean, look at my avatar. It's a cat. Outside of extreme poverty, there was no way I was going to miss this game. But as a side note, the scenes that you see in the trailer are actual locations that you go to in the game, and you see some of these scenes while you play the game, or you can. So obviously this game was originally slated for 2021, and it missed that mark. And then I remember it was delayed till 2022, and it missed that mark. And then it was finally released in July of this year, just recently when this video comes out. And luckily, I had some car trouble, which allowed me to play the game nonstop for several days straight. And it's not like I avoided repairing the car. It just took several days to do it. Well, not so much nonstop. I did take breaks in between sessions, but you know what I mean. With all that said, let's get into the game. So the game starts out on an evening sky that's starting to pour rain. And as the camera pans backwards, it shows more and more cats finally settling on the hero of the story, Cat. I don't know what else to call him. I'm just going to call him Cat. So this small colony of cats is inside a concrete structure of sorts. And you can see that nature's slowly creeping in and starting to take over the concrete structure. When you gain control of Cat, you go up to your fellow cats and you interact with them. This is more or less just to cause them to go onto a nearby collapsed cardboard box and fall asleep. After that, it transitions to the morning and the rain has stopped, followed by a cutscene of all the cats getting out of their little hidey hole. This is where the proper game starts, and you take control of Cat. So usually I might start with the visuals, but I'm going to start with movement in this case. So it's fairly intuitive to move the cat. There's no disorientation with switching from what is usually a bipedal person to a cat. You push in what direction you want to go and he goes. It's that simple. It's really smooth and well animated, I'll give it that. But I had a friend who asked me, does it make you feel like a cat? Honestly, I can't answer that question because I don't know what it's like to feel like a cat. But to some degree, it probably is more or less accurate to what it is to be a cat. There are limitations to that, though. And this is where the jump mechanics come in. You don't have a free-form sort of jump mechanic. It's all semi-contextual, in that you go up to a platform for all intents and purposes, and the game asks you more or less if you want to jump there by giving an indication of a button prompt. And I think they did this in order to make it so that the game runs at a continuous pace instead of having you constantly stopping and having to control your distances to where you're trying to jump. This way they can just have you jump from one object to the other. More or less a very handheld version of platforming. And personally, I think it works. Like I said, it makes it so that you don't have to slow down in order to keep going. The game handles all the complicated jump mechanics such as distance and angle and all that other fun stuff for you. After all, some of these jumps are kind of in tight spaces and others are jumping onto rails, which cats can do. Humans in comparison are kind of clumsy and not nearly as coordinated as cats are. Which leads me to the other aspect of the game, in that you really can't fall off edges. It keeps you from doing that, and it requires that contextual button push in order to jump down from any height. So, what does this exactly mean in terms of the overall game? It definitely takes away a lot of the challenge, or any challenge for that matter, when everything's pretty much done for you. So, if you're looking for a challenge of controlling a cat and doing jumps as a cat, this is not going to be the game for you. This is more of a story driven game, and I kind of got the impression it kind of had a bit of a feel to the old point and clicks with the way you go around and interact with certain NPCs and objects. Now that I covered the controls, let's talk about the visuals a little bit. It's definitely a very detail filled game. There's plenty of it everywhere, wherever you look. The cat looks pretty good, and he moves like a cat. I already mentioned this. But they're more than just something to look at and make the game look pretty. They're also there to tell a story. When you're going through the first part of the game, you can see plenty of metal and concrete everywhere. But something has gone wrong, for all intents and purposes. It's starting to be reclaimed by nature. There's moss and even trees, and there's rust everywhere. This leads to a part of the game where you're traversing through, I guess it's an inner wall to the city, and you come to a part where you know something bad's going to happen. Based on the trailer alone, you know something bad's going to happen, and they telegraph it pretty obviously. And to be honest, this part was heart-wrenching to me when I saw it. And that's when the cat falls. And I will admit, it's a pretty good hook to get you invested because you want to know what happens to this cat. Now, it's not completely unrealistic that this cat would not survive. After all, there's actually a series of slopes, and it shows the cat sliding down it along with going through a pile of junk, which acted as a means to slow the cat's descent down. It's still painful to watch, and it's very saddening to witness as the cat gets up and starts to limp, and you can also hear the mews of the other cats calling for it. And then the cat passes out, sort of faking you out that hint maybe he had died. But some time passes and the cat gets up along with a door opening up, and these two orange blobs scoot into the door as well. When the cat gets back up and starts walking, it's limping, and I just feel horrible, and I don't know how it's going to get help and get through this, but it just stops and magically licks itself, and it's better. They kind of needed to do this for the game to even work, so I get it. Here, the visuals continue to tell a different story than what was above. There's junk everywhere, just trash, along with a lot more concrete and metal and rust. And once you pass under that door, you come across this city that's extremely dark and ominously very empty as well. There's zero activity of any kind. And when I say activity of any kind, I mean that which you would associate with a city. As the cat makes his way through the city, he comes across a robot with two of those orange blobs right next to it, sort of implying that they're doing something to it. And when the cat gets closer to the robot, it comes to life for a brief second, and the cat swats it. As you progress through the city, you eventually come to a point where some neon lights light up, but not all the letters light up, and it spells help. This is where the semi-anthropomorphization comes in when it comes to the cat. We all know normally cats would not be able to read or understand that, or get that these lights are trying to lead you somewhere. In this case, we do get it, and it's something they had to really do in sort of to drive the game forward. Fully well knowing that the cat probably won't understand that, but in this case they know it's being controlled by a human, and since you know what would happen or what that entails, they counted on you following those lights and understanding what they were. I suppose you could say that the cats have undergone some form of evolution at this point that allowed them to understand that, but that seems a bit of a stretch in logic when it comes to the story. There are parts of the game they definitely added in order to make you feel more like a cat or to exhibit cat behavior, such as sharpening your claws. You could do it on a tree at the beginning of the game, but now as you progress, you find carpets and other things you can sharpen your claws on. There is a point in which there's a bunch of paint buckets, and I intentionally tipped them all over the edge. And they did this on purpose as a means to sort of get you to solve the puzzle. That being to push the paint bucket off the edge and break a window, allowing the cat to jump through. Now, there's one element I think they kind of cut out of the game, and that's a survival mechanic. And I kind of got that idea from the cat being able to drink from puddles of water. You find some on the outer wall, and then again in the middle of the city, you find some water leaking into a dish. But it oddly disappears, and there's no more drinkable water anywhere, and there's no food either. So it kind of made me wonder if that was something they were toying with, but never actually went through it, because how's the cat going to get food when there's no food around outside of maybe some rats or birds? And I'm not sure if they would think people would be comfortable with hunting down animals and killing them and eating them. I mean, there's no shortage of games where that happens, so I don't know if that would be a problem. Maybe it's different because you're a cat, or maybe they just couldn't get it to work if that was ever a thing. I'm doubting it was. It was probably just an idea they toyed with shortly. And that's just pure speculation on my part in regards to the survival aspect of it. Yes, you can drink water, but that's it. Afterwards, the cat keeps traversing through the empty city, following the lights, in which you come across multiple of those orange creatures. And to me, they look a lot like the head crabs from Half-Life, but that's just me. And the cat runs in a state of understandable fear because there's a ton of them, and they're clearly after the cat. So these things will latch onto the cat, and you can shake them off. So these creatures aren't very good at jumping. They'll blindly jump, and yes, they can latch onto the cat and slow him down, but like I said, you shake them off. And in order to basically evade them, you get to the end of a, alley or street, in which the cat jumps to the window and is safe. This leads to an apartment and a terminal where someone is clearly typing help or asking for help on the keyboard, and all you can do as a cat is walk all over the keys, which is very true of cats, and it's one of those moments in the game where they sort of intentionally do something that will allow you to act like a cat. The cat then goes into an adjacent room. So in this room, you're supposed to take batteries out and plug them into a wall from various points. And this is why I think it's more akin to an old-fashioned point-and-click without the point-and-click part than maybe a platform or even an action game. This causes a secret room to open, and inside you see a capsule that clearly can hold a person attached or wired to a robot. So Cat uses the robot as a jumping platform, knocking its head off, and makes its way over to a shelf where it finds a small drone and takes it to a workstation where this AI, as it claims to be, uploads itself to a tiny drone. After the drone activates and starts speaking to the cat, it then puts a harness or a vest on him, and the cat sort of slumps to the ground and arches its back as well. Yet again, exhibiting actual cat-like behavior. And I can attest to this, considering I bought harnesses for my cats so I can take them outside and keep them from running into the road or off into the woods. So in combination with this vest and this drone, it kind of acts as a inventory system in which the drone will pick up items and digitize it, I guess, in a sense, and carry it with the cat. It does this with a set of keys to introduce the concept, which you then exit the apartment. And then it introduces a puzzle element to the game in which you have to find the code to use the elevator. And the code is on a whiteboard, which you have to knock some of the stuff down to read all the numbers, or you could just remember it if it's your second or third playthrough. So after going back into the city again, the cat is chased by more of those orange creatures. and you eventually come to a dead end where they can't reach the cat, and it jumps into a tiny little space. As you go through this part, a robot is sweeping up an alley and sees the cat and panics and hits a button sounding an alarm. And as you traverse through this alley, you can see more and more robots running away in fear and closing themselves off in various buildings. You eventually come to a open sort of square area. A robot with a staff is guarding a entrance to a structure. When the robot sees the cat approach, it approaches it and says that it can stay as long as it doesn't eat anybody. Now the drone acts as a go-to for the dialogue, since the cat can't talk, but it also acts as the intermediary for the robots and the cat. But it also serves as a means to tell the story, or actually in this case, a intersecting portion of a story, which runs throughout the whole entire game. As you go through various chapters, different intersections of story interact with the cat's story. The drone called himself B12. And B12's story runs parallel with the cat, with little itty bitty tangents here and there in the form of memories, which you can find as you progress through the game. Every time you find a memory, the AI remembers some aspect of life in the city before it all ceased. And I mean human life, not the bacterial growth or the robots. And I guess it's just another thing I forgot to mention, but the orange creatures are called the Zurk. And through one of B12's memories, you find out where the Zurk came from. Anyways, back to the section where we left off with the Guardian, which is the robot with the staff, and the cat. This is called the slums, and it's the only part of the city that has been safe from the Zurk, at least for the robots. Let me clarify that, the lower part of the city. So you'll immediately notice that the robots don't behave like what you think robots should behave. They have all developed unique personalities as a result of their programming. And I kind of had to put forth a hypothesis in that B12 might be responsible, not intentionally, but by accident, because B12 was once in the network and may have inadvertently rewritten parts of the AI to the robots. For the most part, the game is very linear, with the cat just going from point A to point B. And it kind of tells a story along the way. But the slums act as a kind of hub for some of these sections of linear gameplay, and it's a semi-open world area where you can explore and climb around things. And in some cases, you get to do cat things like sleep in random places, or you can even rub up against robots, and the robots give a little heart symbol because they love that the cat is rubbing up against them and think it's cute. You can also be a total jerk, and I accidentally did it, but you can knock down the robots that are walking, and I felt really bad when I did it, and it was just absolutely like a terrible feeling. The slums aren't the only area. There's one other in the upper city, but otherwise it's just really linear. When I played, I explored it a lot, but there really isn't that much of a point. Earn achievements, there really isn't much to the slums. I mean, it's visually stunning, don't get me wrong, and it's nice to run around as a cat, but it feels kind of underutilized all around. So the Guardian points the cat towards another robot that they call an outsider. They don't call him an outsider because he comes from outside of their group or culture. They call him an outsider because he wants to go outside the city, using the word in a way that it's usually not associated with. So remember when I said it kind of reminded me of old action adventure games when you do jerk things to people? Well, there's a scenario in this game where you see two robots tossing paint cans to each other. And when you talk to one of them, he says, don't disturb him because he's easily startled. So what do? I go right to the guy with the cat, and there's a prompt, and I wait for him to be tossing the can and hit the prompt to mute, causing him to drop the can, which then drops in front of a laundry store, or a laundromat, not laundry store. And the robot comes out angry and starts scrubbing up the paint. This is your opportunity to go into the laundromat and steal a bottle of detergent, which you need to get an item later on in the game so you can advance. Very similar to games like Monkey Island. So after the cat talks to the outsider he was pointed to, you collect a bunch of journals of other outsiders, including one named Doc, who says that you can fix the transceiver that was being used to communicate with other parts of the city. So this character sends the cat out into the city infested by Zurk to go place the antenna on a structure that's really high up in the air. So I will admit, this is where I got the cat kind of killed the first time. And that's because I thought I was being clever by trying to get the Zurk to jump off the edge. And I messed up, and a whole bunch of them got the cat. And I felt really, really bad. So after returning to the slums and going to the bar, you transmit a signal and you get a hold of one of the other outsiders. So this leads to an encounter with a robot that says he's Doc's son, which leads to a series of events in which you find a sort of tracking device that they need to repair in order to find Doc and where he went. And again, another robot sends the cat out to face the Zurk by himself. So the cat doesn't have an issue finding Doc. He finds him sleeping on the bottom floor of a house. The problem is he has no way of getting back without the Zurk eating him. That's when you go into a back room and you find the Defluxor. It's basically a giant UV light that can kill the Zurk. But in order to get it to work, you have to replace a fuse so it can be charged, and they make a Back to the Future reference with the amount of gigawatts needed to charge it. So after replacing the fuse, the Zurk come for the cat, and Doc defends the cat with the Defluxor, making them pop whenever the light shines on them. Now, I'm not trying to go through a beat-by-beat story, but there's a reason for this, and that's because once you go back in, the Doc alters the Defluxor so it can be used on the drone, or B-12, giving the cat a weapon against the Zurk, which the cat gets to try out when he escorts the Doc back to the slums, where he meets up with his son, who is clearly supposed to be Marty, clearly making a reference to Back to the Future. I mean, just look at his vest, it's clearly supposed to be Marty. Afterwards, the cat then goes and meets up with the original outsider he met when he first arrived in the slums, and he goes into the sewers. So the robots have been avoiding the sewers because they're very dangerous for them, because that's where a large concentration of Zurk are. But the cat and the robot head out anyways on a raft, and they eventually come to a door that can't be opened up. So the robot opens the door manually, and the cat goes through, and you can see why it's stuck closed, and that's because the Zurk have nested inside the tunnel. And if you're diligent enough, you can find a memory from B-12 explaining the origins of the Zurk, which was originally a bacteria, which I mentioned before, kind of by accident, but it mutated over the course of time and turned into what is the Zurk. And it was what I thought it was, which was to control the waste produced by the people in the city. So I wanted to mention the Defluxor because you do have the option of using it in the sewers, but there's an achievement called Pacifist where you don't use it at all, and it kind of semi makes it a pointless device. You kind of get the impression that you're going to use it a lot, but in reality you only use it for a short bit, which is the part where you save Doc, and through the sewers, which you can avoid using it entirely. It's just one of those elements of the game that feels like it was not utilized as much as it could have been. So after making it deeper into the sewers, you come across basically what is a wall of flesh and giant eyes, eventually coming to a really big eye. B-12 kind of freezes for a moment and the cat gets attacked, but he comes to his senses and saves the cat with the Defluxor, but frying it in the process, causing the cat to have to flee the sewers with B-12 in his mouth. And when the cat finally gets to safety, he lets him know that it's fried, but it's kind of a meaningless gesture or point because you don't see the Zurk anymore outside of a cutscene. And this brings me to what I thought was going to be another hub area similar to the slums called Ant Village. It's really just sort of a short stop along the way. There's a few things you can do, like grab some plants to get a badge, or be a cat and disrupt a game of dominoes, which I totally laughed out loud when I did this. It was just funny because it's a total cat thing to do. But other than finding out one of the other outsiders named Clementine is no longer there and found her way to the upper city, and that you have to climb the structure to get there, there's no real point to it. Yet again, another part of the game that feels like it could have been used better or more, and they didn't. Now, there is one semi-important bit of story, and that is you see a capsule like you did in the apartment where you meet B12. And B12 realizes he was the scientist. He was trying to transfer his mind to the robot, but something went wrong. And he kind of goes silent for a little bit and then comes back. And that's the only real significant part of Ant Village. Then you climb the structure and enter the upper city. And this is where you enter the upper city, mainly the subway. And you make your way into the city proper looking for Clementine. When you enter the city, you can see that there's plenty of police robots everywhere, along with their drones, looking for Clementine. She has made a bit of a pest of herself, trying to get to the outside. And they don't want to do that because the city's on lockdown, and they don't want to open up the roof. Now, when you find Clementine, she tells you to find another robot who will get you into the NecoCorp facility to get a battery so you can operate the subway. So this little chunk of the upper city that you get to explore is similar to the slums. There's not as much space to climb around, but there's plenty to explore, and some of the scenes you see in the trailer are actually in the game. You can go find them and watch them. So in order to get into the facility of the Neco Waste Management, you have to disguise Blazer as one of the workers. In order to do that, you have to get him a high visibility vest and a hard hat. And again, that sort of behavior that you see from classic adventure games like Monkey Island comes into play, in which you disable cameras for the police robots, which I don't know, that sort of depends on your point of view there. But then you get a tape in order to distract the owner of the clothing shop so you can go and steal a high visibility vest. Then, in order to get the hat, you have to wake up a robot by knocking bottles on top of him, then smuggling yourself inside one of the boxes it's supposed to carry into the shop to steal the hard hat. So after you get both the hard hat and the visibility vest, Blazer sneaks the cat in via the box, the same mechanic they used to get you into the hat shop. So inside this facility, they are dumping trash into the slums and the lower city. And it kind of makes me wonder where it's all coming from. Are there still manufacturing facilities in other parts of the city up and running? Or did the humans just produce that much trash? It's not really ever answered. The robots are mimicking their former human, I don't want to say masters, but I guess that's probably the most appropriate term. So the one thing that sort of bothers me about this game is they show robots cleaning up the place, except the place is still scattered with debris everywhere. And I'm sort of wondering, why is this the state of everything when they show robots sweeping and cleaning up? And Stray is not the only game that does this. Red Dead Redemption definitely did this with several of their buildings that are out in the middle of nowhere. They just made them dilapidated and like cluttered with a whole bunch of garbage on the floor, even when someone's supposed to be living there. So in order to get to the battery that's in the middle of this facility, you have to do a stealth section where you sneak by some of the drones that you see flying in the street. And this is where I kind of thought it was one of those games that tries to be multiple things at once. Kind of like A Way Out or It Takes Two. So after getting the battery, you exit the facility and you have to go back to Clementine's place, where you go to the housing district, in which you have to sneak past more police drones. When you get to Clementine's apartment, she has left a note which basically says for the cat to go to the club. When you get to the club, you are betrayed by Blazer, and the cat is stunned by some of the police drones. So when the cat wakes up, it's in a cage suspended over some water, but it's not really hard to get out. Now this whole entire section continues the whole stealth mechanics, but this time you don't have B12 to help you out. It's sort of that weird trope where they take your powers away temporarily and see how you do. And again, this prison sort of tells a story in which these robots have learned to be a bit on the cruel side, and that there's multiple rooms with robots that have been buried by their prison cells being collapsed, and others that have just died for all intents and purposes due to their batteries running out more than likely. Again, sort of mimicking human behavior and maybe even exaggerating it to a degree. So after the cat rescues Clementine, they find B12 being analyzed by the robots, or the police robots. And after rescuing him, you try to escape the prison via one of their three-wheeled motorcycle vehicles, in which the cat jumps onto the back, and then they head to the subway station where Clementine shuts the gate that the cat went through and says that she will distract the police drones. And that part of the outsider code is that one of them must make it out, and it might as well be the cat. So when you arrive at the control room, you see that the area is pristine and clean, and that there's robots that have not developed personalities maintaining the cleanliness of the area. And here you learn that there was a plague that wiped out the humans in the city, but the city was touted as the safest city in the world. But then they all died to a plague, including the people up in the control room who had access to unlimited electricity and resources, fared no better than everybody else in the city. And they did sort of pass their legacy on to the robots in the lower city. So in order to open the roof and end the lockdown, they have to sabotage some of the equipment, and then B12 has to hack into the computer. And there's 4 terminals, and each one causes damage, and it's pretty much telegraphed that this is not good for B12 with each and every hack that he does. Cat then picks up B12 and takes him over to a workstation like he did when he first found B12, kind of ending where he began, letting the cat know that when he opens the roof, he will cease to function. And he goes through with it, and the drone falls to the floor, and the cat curls up next to him. So a cutscene plays with sunlight finally shining down on the city, wiping out any Zerg that are out in the open, along with several of the robots seeing the sunlight for the very first time. And it shows Clementine being closed in by the police drones, and the sunlight causes them to fail. That part I don't quite get. But suddenly all the robots are now outsiders. And when you gain control of Cat again, you head for the main door. That is now unlocked due to the lockdown being disabled. Eventually, a cutscene takes place, and it shows the cat walking up the steps, and sits on the steps, turns, looks at the camera, and does a slow blink. I'm pretty sure this is very much intentional, and the cat's supposed to be blinking at the player, telling them sort of thank you and maybe I like you, because that's what cats do when they show a form of affection for people, is they do a slow blink at them. The cat then turns and walks out. For me, this was a happy, sad ending. Yes, I'm glad the cat got out, but I wanted to see that reunion with the other cats. And I'm kind of hoping I get that, even if it's just DLC. So, this game is very short. I mean, you can do it in 2 hours if you don't look for the memories and do all the scratching and stuff like that. I messed around when I was playing, exploring, trying to do as many cat things as I could, and I did it in about 5.5 hours, and then maybe another hour and a half going around finding stuff that I didn't find before, trying to unlock the various achievements that I didn't get or know about when I was playing through the first time. And I did get the speedrun achievement, beating the game in about an hour and 45 minutes. And I only played through the game once, but I mean, I played certain sections of the level multiple times, particularly the city level. So it seems to me they were definitely intent on telling a story more than engaging people in long-term gameplay, which is fine. I like a good story, and like I said, there were sort of multiple stories intersecting with that of the cat. But the game is admittedly on the short side. Although it is actually a pretty good-looking game, and you sort of get a feel of what it's like to be a cat. So there's something I wanted to go over in terms of the visuals. It's very detailed, and particularly when it comes to the cat, if you pay attention, you can actually see subtle movements to the cat, particularly around the ears. You can see the ears kind of move in different directions, along with the cat moving its head when it's approaching a position you can jump. Characters moving their heads in directions to indicate some sort of either enemy or object or anything isn't new, but it's pretty impressive to get all this detail for a cat. I mean, it also includes its tail, I might add. And the other aspect that kind of made me happy is that it was an actual cat. Not like, let's say, a Bubsy or, well, I hate to bring it up, but the Life of Black Tiger. The other thing I wanted to touch on is I'm not sure how to classify this game. A quick search on the internet says that it's an adventure game, which I would agree with. Definitely an indie game. It has a scale of being an indie game. Platforming, kind of, mainly because it's so controlled by the AI, for all intents and purposes, that all the platforming isn't exactly difficult. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm just used to games like, let's say, Mario, where you have to control the character precisely. In this case, it's controlled by the cat, or not so much the cat, but the systems running in the background, and there's no sort of effort other than you pointing the cat in the right direction. And there are some light puzzle elements as well, but they weren't too difficult to figure out. By that I mean they were actually really, really easy. But it says a simulation game. That I would disagree with, mainly because, yes, you're a cat, but you don't exactly act like a cat in regards to its motivations. Its motivations are definitely human in nature, outside of maybe getting outside, which my cat's trying to do all the time, but the overall actions of the cat are indicative of that of a human, not an animal. And I would say in the case of this story, I would try to be getting out too, because I had no idea how I would survive in a city that's pretty much dead. I'd say overall the game is definitely very enjoyable. And honest, at the time that I played it, it's something I kind of needed, was just a short, simple game that I had fun playing. And this fit the mark almost perfectly. Especially with games, let's say like Gears of War or Sea of Thieves, where it just takes hours upon hours just to do small little things like level up a class or gather loot. I mean, I did a voyage in the Sea of Thieves and it took me 6.5 hours to complete. And the only reason why I did that is I got lucky and got a day off, and I wanted to see how long it would actually take me if I completed it from beginning to end. And to be honest, it's just way too grindy, and that's just one voyage, and I hardly got anything out of it, and I sort of became disenchanted with games that are just way too long and way too grindy, like Sea of Thieves gets in the later part of the game. So this game was like a breath of fresh air in comparison to what I've been playing. Now, the one negative thing I would say about this game is its price. Yes, it's $40, and it seems a bit too pricey for the amount of gameplay I got. But I was more than happy to support the game, and I did pre-order a physical copy when it releases in September, which seems counter to my point, but I kind of wanted to support the game and also get a physical edition because I didn't particularly care that I could only get a digital version. So overall, the game was definitely enjoyable with a pretty good story with some loose ends, which I'm pretty sure were intentional, leaving it open for sequels. I would definitely buy this game, particularly if it goes on sale. So usually I say if you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, which I will do. But also I'm dedicating this particular part to my cats, Buster, Trinity, Oliver, and Voltaire. Thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe. Remember, cat equals like...